Welcome back to the Sports Media Backhaul. I'm Galen Clavia. Thanks for your patience as we've been on hiatus the last couple of months. Where have we been? Well, I've been writing a book. It's been a pretty interesting experience writing a book on sports and social media and going basically through the end part of the writing process, about to head into the heavy editing process here over the course of the next couple of months. But the heavy lifting is almost out of the way, and I'm looking forward to resuming some of my other media activities, podcasting being my favorite one, and that's the one that we're going to be restarting here over the next couple of weeks, both this podcast and hopefully the Flipside podcast as well. So all you Flipside fans, don't worry, we do plan on being back very soon. The Sports Media Backhaul, for those of you who remember, is meant to be a short podcast where we talk about things going on within sports media. And it could be a little bit of anything or everything, whether it's social media related items, whether it's television related items, whether it's the ways that sports entities are handling themselves within social media or sports media. And it could also be just some random things that we think are interesting on a given day. If you're interested in being involved in this podcast, please hit me up on Anchor. My address is Dr. GC. I love to take messages, and I love to respond to messages that people have about any of these topics, anything that you think is of particular interest, and we'll try to answer them honestly and entertainingly. As we look at the landscape here over the last couple of months, it's been a pretty crazy time. The NBA has had this continual issue with China as a result of Daryl Morey's tweet, and we've got a lot of thoughts on that we're going to get to over the course of the next couple of weeks as we're still seeing this play out. There's still news coming out. There was just a poll put out by Seton Hall that focused specifically on people's attitudes towards the NBA and Daryl Morey and China. That was not a poll that I was expecting, frankly, but it did a good job of reigniting a debate that seemed to have finally died down a little bit. So we'll talk about that a little bit as we move forward. We're also going to talk a lot about the changing landscape of the media and sports as we head into 2020 and beyond. We're only a few months away from the change of the decade. And I was thinking about this as I was sitting here. I'm in an Airbnb right now in Lincoln, Nebraska. What am I doing there? I drove up for the Indiana-Nebraska football game. This is a game that I've been wanting to go to for a long time. It's the first time Indiana's played in Lincoln since 1959, I believe, or 1960. Nebraska's been in the Big Ten for almost a decade, and despite being in the same league as Indiana, they just haven't had a chance to play. And so I wanted to see what this environment was like. I wanted to see what this crowd is like. It's a famous college football establishment. They still get almost 90,000 people out here every game, and it really made me think about how things have stayed the same and changed both over the course of the last 20 years. I drove some student media members up who were covering the football game, and I was thinking about the last time that I had done that from a student perspective. When I was a student back at Indiana in the late 1990s, we used to get credentials and go broadcast games at places like Penn State or Michigan. And those were really fun trips. I learned a whole lot about media. I learned a whole lot about different environments. And I'm expecting, from that perspective, things to be relatively the same. But it's interesting because the way that the media landscape has evolved over the course of the last 20 years, we tend to take it for granted, but it really has changed significantly. We were driving out. We stopped at Arthur Bryant's Barbecue, probably the most famous brand name barbecue place in the United States. It's been around in Kansas City since the early 1900s. We had a good meal, and it was fascinating because one of our student media members that was on the trip shot footage of us eating and talking about the experience and shot some B-roll of the whole thing, edited it together on his laptop when we got back into the SUV, and then uploaded it to Twitter, and everybody got a chance to share in that experience, and people retweeted it, and it got me thinking about how we would have probably done the same sorts of things back in the late 90s if we'd had the capacity, but it just was never there. And for it to be there now, and for someone to just be able to casually put a 3-minute video out about barbecue and have it get 40 or 50 or 60 likes or retweets in a relatively short period of time, it really represents what a tremendous sea change we've had in media capacity and the way that people consume media and the way that we think about what we can and can't have access to. And on the flip side, from a creator's perspective, what sorts of things we can provide the audience. We had another thing that made me think about this last night. We got into Lincoln. It's about a 10, 11-hour drive. And we pull in, we go get some food, and we found out through Twitter that there was going to be a meeting of Indiana fans at one of the restaurants in the Rail Yard district. And so we met up with them, and it ended up being like 40 or 50 IU fans were there. And there was a mixture of people. There were media people, there were students, there were a lot of alumni, people that were coming in from all these different places, and they'd all learned about it via Twitter. And I just thought that was another example of the way that things have changed, because 20 years ago, if we're meeting up in, say, Happy Valley for an IU Penn State game, unless you knew somebody with the varsity club or the alumni association and they had told you, hey, we're going to meet at this spot, you probably wouldn't have had access to that sort of an experience. Not only were people able to find it through social media and make that connection with other IU fans and make a connection to the event in person, but then the picture got tweeted out, the picture got put on Instagram, and it allowed people that weren't here to feel like they were sharing in that experience also. And we'll see many more examples of that happening throughout the course of the game today. And perhaps this is all like, well, duh, of course that's happening. But I think sometimes we need to take a step back and realize how much more access people have now to experiences if they want that access, whether that is through social media and Twitter and Instagram and those areas, or whether it's through other avenues. There's so much more access to experiences and events. And sports organizations that are able to utilize that properly are, I think, the ones that are making the most headway with their audiences within the field of sports media. And I think the same thing for journalistic outlets. We saw this morning the Premier League squad, Rebecca Lowe and Robbie Musto and Robbie Earl and Kyle Martino down in Austin, Texas. And, they're there all day. It's a fan fest, and they've got hundreds of people there watching Premier League soccer with them at this bar. And it was really cool to see. And again, it's a situation where through streaming television, we're able to access that experience as well and feel like we're a part of it. And the fact that NBC has done that with the Premier League in a bunch of different places, I think has given a lot of people the emotional feeling like they're a stakeholder in a way that they wouldn't have been otherwise. And for a company like NBC, who's a journalistic outlet, they have a vested interest both financially and from a fan service perspective, I think, in making sure that those sorts of experiences are what's getting in the televisions or the phones or whatever of the consumer. Anyway, that'll wrap it up for this edition of the Sports Media Backhaul. We'll look forward to hearing from you folks over the next couple of weeks. Be sure to leave messages. Be sure to tweet at me at Dr. GC on Twitter. Happy to take any of your questions. And have a great weekend. We'll talk to you on the flip side. So long.